Peace to everybody. Really enjoyed the dialogue, really enjoyed the presentations. I'm pretty much homies with most of the people on this panel, so it's good to be in good company with y'all, see y'all in good spirits amidst of everything that is going on out here. But for those who don't know me, my name is Marlon Richardson. I go by the artist name Unlearn The World. I am an MC, producer, DJ, overall hip-hop creative director. But further to that, I am also the education director for Hip Hop for Change, as well as a senior instructor for Today's Future Sound. I've done work with Hip Hop Congress up in Auburn, so salute to Rocky and everybody up there. But I'm here to speak to my experience just in the hip hop educational space, but further to that, the work that Hip Hop for Change has been doing and I've been doing as an individual in the juvenile detention system. Aside from these respective organizations, I'm also adjunct professor at Hip Hop Holy Names University, teaching a sociology class called Hip Hop Communities and Experiences. And we're hoping to do another iteration of that class next year, so fingers crossed on that. But I approach everything pretty much, aside from me being a hip-hop educator, I'm very much active as a hip-hop artist and as somebody who engages in the culture philosophically, putting out albums, doing live shows, touring the country, touring internationally. And since I was 15, it has been an expressed desire of mine to be an educator as well as an MC. It wasn't just an MC, it wasn't just an educator as a pivot from the music industry. This was something that has been wholeheartedly part of my brand as a hip hop practitioner since my foray into the world of artistry and the world of creativity. And I've used that experience in my youth as well as in my adulthood as kind of the fundamental philosophical approach that I have to education work, right? Just seeing the self-alchemy that has happened with my own life and the lives of people who I'm around, seeing us go from what's perceived as bad kids or knuckleheads or, kids who are at risk or whatever the case is, to end up becoming educators, and that's part and parcel and parallel to the transformative power of hip hop and the remix culture that comes with this form of expression that we all are practitioners of or admirers of or enthusiasts of. So that informs a lot of my thinking. That informs a lot of the approach in the curriculum that I develop, the training that I give to my staff, and the way that I approach other curriculums that I use in my teaching. As it relates to the the hip hop education work in juvenile detention centers, my first exposure, I have to give a shout out to my brother Tyson Amir. He's an amazing writer, performer, hip hop head, MC, who 15, 16 years ago, him and I had done a lot of work in education, hip hop education, and going down to places like Fresno and talking to youth down there. And I remember in getting to know him, it was one of those things where he was like, well, I teach in jail. And I was like, that's interesting. He's a rapper who teaches in these facilities. And that always stuck with me. And then fast forward years later, as I was making my transition out of the private sector and doing just a regular 9-to-5 day job and transitioning into being a hip hop educator, first with Today's Future Sound, it was always a thought of mine that eventually I would love to take this skill set that I'm learning, the skill set that I already have, and start working with kids in this kind of population, start working with kids in juvenile detention center. I always liken it and harken back to what I call the philosophic debt that I have for myself as a 15-year-old kid who set out to do this. But I also would be remiss if I didn't mention the countless other friends of mine who weren't able to make it out of those circumstances, whether they were presently incarcerated, whether they were incarcerated before being released and unfortunately passing away due to gun violence or other forms of violence. Just thinking how crazy my life could have been had I not been exposed to certain avenues of expression, had I not been given certain opportunities, and had I not made certain choices, my life could have easily have been the same kind of 15-year-old kid I'm reaching in Alameda Juvenile Detention Center or in San Francisco or wherever my work takes me. And that's never lost on me. I see myself these kids very much, and I make it a point to come in there with the same level of social capital needed to reach them, right? Where the academics may not have the effect in the way that we would desire, where the credentials and the thinking and the modalities may not have the effect on a kid who literally just wants to rap to stay sane. I can very much relate to wanting to rap just to stay sane, and make sense of my environment, and keep me away from troubles and dangers, and the frames of references that I would use in my music reflected that. So to be in these environments where we're teaching kids, and I've had the pleasure of working with the DISA as well, just in the intercession, and you too, Ramen, in the intercessions that we do at Juvenile Hall. And those are more intense kind of workshops and programs that we bring to the hall, aside from me volunteering on a weekly basis or being there throughout the last 3 years of my hip hop education career, and just seeing the need. Let's just first identify the need for these children, because that's ultimately what we're dealing with at the end of it all. Regardless of what their crimes are, regardless of what their charges or why they're in there, they are children. And I think that is often lost on the correctional officers who are there. I think that's often lost on many of the people who may be disillusioned in doing this kind of programming. You're dealing with children who have not formulated the cognitive function necessary to think rationally, right? And we've done a great we had a great conversation, Dr. Travis and Dr. Gann, about trauma and what that does. But you see it very, very wholeheartedly. The inability to critically think, or the inability to just focus and maintain, because you're worried about everybody and everything in that space. And I see that, and I recognize that. So I see, and I'm very sensitive to their desires to escape that through rapping or through making beats. And a lot of the time they don't even want to make beats because they have words that they need to get out. They have words they need to. In my own therapy sessions myself, it's a thing called adding language to the things you feel. So my role as a mentor, my role as an educator, has very much been seeped in helping these young men and women find language in their story as well as their message, and trying to distinguish between the two. Understanding what your story is, how you came to be where you are in present day. And now with that understanding, or trying to be grounded in that understanding, how do we start creating and formulating a message that you are going to carry out to the world in a way that is not going to reiterate the same tropes and stereotypes that you bought into that got you here to begin with? Right. And I often go in there to not only create the relationship and to solidify trust, but also, now that this trust is established, let's challenge some of these norms that you have grown to accept, that you have grown to agree to. Right? Let's talk in the language that is comfortable for you as to how to move away from gratuitous use of the N-word, move away from, the references to violence and crime in all of the music that you want to create. Right? Let's kind of move away from that. Let's expose you to alternative means of expressing yourself, whether that's me showing you artists that I appreciate from my era of hip hop, or it's a matter of showing artists that are doing it in your era of hip hop that are moving away from these messages, right? And again, it's first establishing the separation between story and message, because I think often that's conflated, right? We hear these kids and we hear the content in their lyrics, and they're saying, well, I'm just talking about what goes on in my environment. Yes, that may be. But is that story yours? Is that a story that you want to authentically own for yourself? And if not, let's dig deeper into that, right? And this has to be done with care, right? I think it's important, and this is a tool that I've gotten from Dr. Gann. It's important to be grounded in trauma-informed care. It's important to be grounded in dynamic mindfulness and giving these tools to these young people in terms of how to regulate emotion, how to kind of understand what they may have gone through and what their present mental state is, and responding to that with care and with love and all these different things. But really using those dynamics to challenge the narrative by which they're trying to present themselves. And eventually, in my experience, what I found is the more you allow them to just talk, the more you allow them to rap, uncensored, unfiltered, it eventually runs out. There are eventually less and less gun references. There are eventually less and less N-words and all these other things, because again, it's the mechanism that was created for survival. And by putting them in a position where they feel comfortable, where they feel safe, where they feel somewhat stable, relatively speaking, you're able to then challenge and pull so much more from their story. So that story about, yo, I'm sliding the block and I'm gonna do this to my ops, then becomes, my mother wasn't there, or my mother was locked up, my brother died, right? You start to get into the crust of why they're there. What caused them to start making the decisions that led them to be where they are. But in that discovery is an amazing opportunity to start remixing the self, right? That self-alchemy that I referred to earlier. It's that moment of understanding, of visualization, where they can start seeing themselves in different lights. They can start seeing themselves in different avenues of life. They can start literally just maybe for the first time in their lives contemplating life beyond next week or the week after, and getting them to put that into rhythm, getting that to put them in a cohesive story. This is the hope, this is the desire, and this is what we've historically worked on. And I've seen and been part of a lot of great success stories to that extent. Shout out to Rhythmic Mind as well, who do amazing work in the halls with their freestyle methodology and just kind of reclaiming narratives. And I think we all on this panel can speak to the idea of trying to help and coach reclaiming the narrative of the youth that we're serving, right? Whatever that narrative is, and making it so that they come out better people, right? The greatest remix story, one of the greatest American remix stories, would have to be Malcolm X. And I think that his story in and of itself plays a very pivotal and influential role in hip hop in general. With how many times Malcolm X is cited one way or another. We're talking about a kid who dealt in the streets and was involved in the streets, who reformed himself to be one of the more loud and powerful and influential voices in not just Black history and Black America, but America, period. To the point where we're, 50, 60 years past him dying, and we're still dropping documentaries about him and his legacy. And I grew up literally 2 blocks away from where he was assassinated. And that was a very profound realization for me, right? Growing up, understanding, what was that building? What did it used to be? Oh, it was this man and what he did and what he did for me, and in lieu of having my own father, right? Having these kind of archetype father figures, right? That I recognize that in my own life and in my own position, I play that role once a trust is established with these kids. There becomes a father figure role. There becomes a big brother role, an OG role that is never lost on me. And I dive into that with loving intention to hopefully remix the individual. One thing that I've recognized in doing this work is the lack of services that happen on the outside of everything that we do, right? It's amazing for us to be able to go in there and even for a week intensively get them to write songs, record tracks, make beats, but then they get hyped. Then they get what we call the artist's bug. Now they're ready to go. And now they're like, yo, I get out in 2 weeks. Where can I go? And it's that answer, and I think all of us can speak to this, that answer is very iffy. Depending on the day, depending on the policy, depending on the CO, depending on what can we tell them? Maybe I'll give you my number. Maybe if you do call me, maybe I can text back. Maybe I can point you in the right direction. What kind of services can we provide as part of the reentry program for these youth? Has been the perpetual question that I've had as long as I've been working in this field. So part of that is what informed what is presently developing as the Pipeline to Positivity program with Hip Hop for Change, where we're partnering with places like Alameda juvenile detention, Camp Sweeney. We're partnering with group homes and alternative high schools to recruit young people who want to be exposed and be provided mentorship and resources as it relates to careers in hip hop. And when we say careers, we're not just talking about being a rapper or being a producer. There's plenty of that. And I literally did a post on Facebook the other day. I don't think hip hop needs any more rappers. We need thinkers, right? We need people who are in the community, who are critically challenging the status quo with their words and with their language, that can remix not only themselves, but the community at large, right? So we can start ushering in a new generation of hip hop creators that are thinkers, that are grounded in the history of hip hop, that are grounded in reclaiming their own personal narratives, that are grounded and empowered in community responsibility. I think that changes the dynamic over the course of the next 2 generations. Right? You're exposing them to not only here's how to rap, here's how to record your own records, here's how to put together an album, here's how to make a beat, but maybe you want to be a videographer. You know, every rapper needs a music video. So maybe you want to study videography. Maybe you want to study photography, right? Maybe you want to study set design or graphic design, create flyers for these shows. There's so many other aspects of hip hop that we often don't think about when we talk about education, when we talk about being culturally responsive, that kids can find inroads into and possibly careers. But grounded in this knowledge of themselves and grounded in this sense of communal responsibility, it hits different when they're teaching. It hits different when they're performing. The lyrics are different. The vibe of the music is different. The vibe of the video is different because now it's rooted and based in all these other factors that they wouldn't have thought about had they just been left to their own devices in a juvenile detention cell. So with the Pipeline to Positivity program, we're looking to expose them to these models, looking to expose them to community-based artists who are ingrained with the same thinking. Like, yeah, you may not know me from TV or YouTube or whatever, but I'm in the hood with you. I'm driving around Lake Mary. You could see me. You know how many times I literally, in my neighborhood, I've seen 4 or 5 people who I used to teach in juvenile detention centers who are now my neighbors. Right? And they remember me from being in the units, right? Or going to a Juneteenth event and seeing 3, 4, 5 of my students just out there chilling. Now we're in different respects. Now we have love for each other. Now I feel like they're part of the community. And now they're on the other side of this. They're on the outs, as we like to call it, with a better understanding of who they are. These kids with exposed to these different career pathways with the hopes of giving them the tools they need to empower their own communities. I led a team down in El Salvador where we were working not only with young people but adults on how to create pop crews in their respective cities outside of San Salvador and other places in the country. Kids who were gang members or maybe still have affiliations in that sense, but now we're transforming them into hip hop crews, right? This isn't a gang thing anymore. We're not advocating for violence. How do you unite the homies to create a cool, empowering mural in your home city? How do you gather the homies together to start dance parties, right, where there's nonviolence? How do you gather the homies to put together an album that authentically reflects the experiences that you dealt with, right? This is done through the mentorship, through the idea in hip hop of each one teach one, right? We're going in there and they're having this one-on-one exposure with community-based artists who are serving as mentors, who are all trained in classroom management and being educators and all of these things, so that we can help them. And the idea is not from the artist staff, but trickling down to the participants to create that community-based narrative that we need, or that community-based counter narrative to what we see in the billion-dollar machine that is the hip-hop and music industry, that literally is maintained by celebrating and glorifying the collective mental illness of Black and brown people. And that has to be understood. And we have to recognize the danger in that.